It's late here in the shop tonight. I thought I'd do a quick walkthrough, show you guys what I've been up to with this engine. This is the Om617a turbo model Mercedes diesel engine. In the back we have a Chevy 700R4 with a Novak adapter plate that goes to the Jeep 231 transfer case. That unit comes with a shaft that goes all the way through it, mates to the transfer case. We got a low car shift lever there, universal shift lever to get the speeds correct. Cracked this case. I'm not sure how I did this, but this case, I just noticed I went to mate these two together tonight. That's kind of what stopped me, and I noticed this big giant crack in there. I'll have that fixed tomorrow. Have it TIG welded. Not sure what happened there. Anyways, moving forward, we have a Speed Gems 700R4 engine adapter plate. Comes with a Chevy 168 flex plate with a crank adapter in there. We have this oil filter housing I made here, spin-on oil filter housing. It's got a Jeep oil pressure sending unit, 4AN line, feeds the turbo. I cut the old unit off. I did some modifications inside the housing so the oil flows correctly, and I've added this Wix giant spin-on filter. What happens is the Jeep right over there, the firewall, if I could point, right there, kind of sits over the top of this housing. In the factory unit, you have to take the cartridge and the lid out about this far before you could start to tilt it forward, and that's a real problem with the firewall being right about here. You need almost 8 inches of vertical space before you can start tilting that old cartridge out. This one here, you can just unspin it, 3/4 inch, pop it off. If it becomes too messy, I'll pop a hole in it. That'll allow the oil to drain back into the motor before I change this. We have a bypass tube here so I can run this on a stand. This normally would go to the oil cooler. So that is my spin-on oil filter adapter. Here we have the diesel Meccan 7.5mm M pump. The M pump is special. I know Diesel Meccan is now making 7.5mm MW pumps, which is really nice. But the M pump fits on just fine. The M pump, in my opinion, is superior to the MW due to Diesel Meccan's highly adjustable external ALDA. When you get a super MW pump from Diesel Meccan, he only has the factory ALDA. The factory ALDA is not adjustable, so what you get is what you get. You can't adjust it. It's just how it is. I like the adjustability of his external ALDA. He makes a fantastic product, and his external ALDA has served me well. You can adjust max fuel on the MW pump via this external ALDA. You can also adjust how soon max fuel comes on. Another benefit of the M pump is this screw right here that the MW pump does not have. That is your external idle adjustment. You can adjust the idle on this engine right from the outside of the pump. I've got this one adjusted about 850 RPMs to compensate for air conditioning and cooling when I'm stuck at stoplights. Here we have a 5/8 adapter fitting. I've drilled out the factory Mercedes unit here, and I've tapped it with a 3/8 tap, and I've run 5/8 lines for my heater core. We have Monarch injectors I just installed. There's a guy that I introduced you guys to on the page. He does fantastic. Brandon Oswald. Brandon Oswald did a fantastic job rebuilding my injectors. He did them far less than I could possibly do them. These are Monarch, made in Germany, Monarch injectors. I've installed ARP. I was working with ARP for a while, trying to develop some head studs for this engine, and this is the first test engine. I've got some head studs on here, and I believe there's 22 head studs on this. And here you can see I adapted all the Jeep sensors have been adapted to this engine. That's the Jeep temperature, water temperature sensor. That's the Jeep oil pressure sensor. And here we have my Sandin 510, I believe, 509 or 510 air conditioning. They put this a lot in dump trucks, a lot of conversion, AC conversions on old hot rods. They use this AC compressor here. Works really well, pumps a lot of juice. This is a Koch's engine adapter. Koch makes Nathan Koch, great guy. I've talked to him for a couple times, and he just has a good product. He makes a pan that's for a Wrangler. This is the Wrangler pan, and this is a highly modified Wrangler pan. What I did is his pan typically came from here to here, and this was angled like this. I cut that out to have more clearance in the Cherokee for a steering assembly, which goes right around in here. And I've added capacity back to the rear. I've added all that back. You can see where this is where his pan used to be. It used to go like this, and it used to go like this. Well, I added it to the rear. That will also help me when I'm on steep hills. That won't allow the oil to run up this ramp. Instead, it'll just pool back here. Hopefully, it'll keep my engine oil close to the pickup, which is located approximately right about there. I also took about 1.5 inches off the depth of his pan due to the track bar. This pan's custom clearanced by my Dana 30 when I lost my bump stop. Dana 30 decided to come up and say hello to the oil pan. So that's what happened there. I also added this port here for my oil engine temperature. This is the bracket I created to mount this Sandon pump. Created this bracket, it mounts through the block right there with a big bolt. It's got this plate, kind of sandwiches the block right there. It's got this plate, and it comes up and it connects right here to the bottom of the power steering bracket with those 2 bolts. And it's got a tensioner. It grabs this ear right here, goes through the plate, and it's got a nut up here that I can turn to tighten, to tension this whole unit. And once I do that, I can lock it down with this nut here. And that's where that sits. If we move up, you see that what I've done recently is I've attached a York to the side of the power steering mount with a big 3/8, I think it's almost half inch aluminum plate, and I've mounted this York. That's going to be my onboard air system. I've tested this on the stand and it works really well. And it's got a dynamic tensioner. I had to put this dynamic tensioner on here because this power steering pump moves independent depending on how tight you need this belt right here. So this pump can always be in a different location, so I had to put some kind of adjustable tensioner on here, and that works really well. I have converted my Mercedes funky metric fittings over to AN fittings. This is just looped right now for stand use. This is a power steering pump out of a 90s SDL. It's special to me because it's the only one I could find that has this dual belt pulley, which works for my unit. But a tip for you guys: any pump out of this era, let's say the 500 SEL out of 1984, the V8s came with 82 bar power steering pumps. The factory unit that came on the diesels are typically 64 bar. This is an 82 bar. This is something like 1,700 pounds if you're turning big tires. This is really what you want to get. This will really help you turning those big tires. It turns my tires no problem. So 82 bar unit. It's the York compressor. And also out of that 90s SEL, I found this water pump pulley. It's about 50% smaller than the factory diesel unit. This smaller pulley should help it move more water, should cool it better, cool it off better at idle and slow RPM, lower RPMs. So hopefully the idea is this is going to move a lot more water through this head, because these engines do run hot. And it'll also spin this fan a lot faster, hopefully 50% faster. On the crank pulley, I've machined these grooves out of here. These grooves match the factory Jeep grooves that would typically be in the flex plate of the Jeep, and it's these three sets of 4 notches. I've moved the CPS, the Jeep CPS, right here in the front. It reads these notches. The computer has no idea it's not in the Jeep, so you need the crank sensor. If you want to tack, you need to do this. You mount your crank sensor right about there. You cut notches in this damper. Now, to wake up your computer, not only will you need that input, the CPS, which is right down there, but it also needs to see the cam sensor. The cam sensor I removed out of the inside of the distributor from the Jeep, and I mounted it to this power steering pump. There's the sensor right there. I mounted it to the back of this power steering pump, and I epoxied magnets on the back of this pulley. So when you start to crank your engine over, the cam sensor gets a signal from these magnets, and also the crank sensor gets a signal from these notches. The computer wakes up and it reads your RPMs, and you have a tachometer. So I just mule the computer. I have all the factory gate sending units on here. Got the temperature, got the oil, got the cam. Got the CPS. That gets all the gauges running. Even the volt gauge works off the alternator. This is a Bosch alternator. This Bosch alternator is used on John Deere tractors. It's an open cage design versus the old design, which I got a couple of them down there, which is a closed design. The closed design's fine. This one produces a lot more amps at idle. Better for off-road. I added a smaller pulley, spin it a little faster, produce a little more power. I converted, I think I showed you on the other side there, I converted everything to 5/8 hose nipples, standard, so you don't have to run 10 different hoses, size hoses around here. This outlet for the heater core, for the Mercedes heater core, can be easily tapped with a 3/8 standard tap, and you can screw in your 5/8 hose nipple in straight inside of the Mercedes unit. So that's what I have there. Exhaust manifold. This is the rare, hard to find, expensive exhaust manifold out of the 1978-79 non-EGR OM617. If you can get a turbo model, if you can get one of these, it's worth it. The runners are a lot larger than the EGR model. Not only that, but without the EGR, you can clear this bigger turbo. The EGR unit, it would smack right here into this turbo. So not only do you get better flow, the runners are bigger in this exhaust manifold, but the turbo fits without modification. It fits right in there. To fit this turbo, this is the Holset HX30W. HX30W is good to something like 300 horses. It fits this motor fantastically. I have, typically, the factory turbo that goes on this unit would be turned, and it would be fed directly into this intake. I have blocked that off. I've welded that shut, and I've clocked my turbo pretty much straight up. And then I took this intercooler, which is they sell this. It's an upgraded Toyota MR2 intercooler you can get on eBay for like 90 bucks. Clocked my turbo up, bought my intercooler, added a V-band clamp down here, modified the air filter bracket, put a turbo blanket on it, mounted it there to the bracket, made this pipe, cut a hole in the back of the intake manifold, added another V-band clamp. So the air pretty simply comes in the front, really low pressure loss, flows across here, cools off, runs directly into the intake, so we don't get a lot of turbo lag, especially for an off-road vehicle. We have a problem with these turbos blowing or these engines blowing oil out the turbo due to the super high oil pressure they run. They run somewhere up to past 110 psi oil pressure, easily past 60 psi even when they're warm. These turbos are only good to about 60 psi, so they will blow oil. I had to come up with a solution. I found this nice unit, just installed it. This is an oil regulator for turbos, and it's a bypass style. Oil pressure comes in, anything over 40 psi gets shunted down here back to the pan, so the turbo only ever sees 40 psi of full flow oil. Here we got the adapter plate. This plate here controls my Chevy 700R4, the TV cable, throttle valve cable. Throttle valve comes in right over here, connects right here, and I've got the correct throw to shift my transmission. Transmission shifts perfectly. Trying to think of what else I can tell you. Try to catch everything on this motor. Speed Gems uses the gear reduction Chevy starter, which has no problem turning this motor over. It's gear reduction, uses very few amps to do it. It's a very efficient setup. Got a stainless steel heat shield I made in there. Turbo blankets made from some fantastic guys down in Fort Myers, Metcalf Marine and Exhaust. Great guys down there. They whipped that nice turbo blanket out for me. That turbo blanket's probably a couple years old and still looks fantastic. Anyways, I hope I hit all the highlights. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I hope this video helps somebody. That is an FTI 2400 stall torque converter, stalled somewhere around 22 in this setup. So there's my engine. It's getting ready to be installed. Got to put it back in here. I'm working on this Hydro Boost system. Gonna get the Hydro Boost finished up and put the motor back in.